Today, we're continuing in our series, The God I Wish You Knew, and I've entitled our message, God Wants You, or He Wants You to Be Sure. English author H.G. Wells, famous for science and fiction novels like The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, or The War of the Worlds, once wrote a very short story. It was called The Country of the Blind. It's about an inaccessible, luxurious valley in Ecuador where, due to a strange disease, everyone is blind. After 15 generations of this blindness, there was no recollection of sight or color or the outside world at all. And finally, a man from the outside, a man who actually could see, literally fell into their midst. He had fallen off a high cliff and survived, and he stumbles into their forgotten little country. And when he realized that everyone else was blind, he remembered the old adage, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So he was excited. He tried at first on several occasions to tell the people there about sight. He said, "Look here, you people, there are things you do not understand in me." And once or twice, one or two of them attended to him, and they sat with faces downcast and ears turned intelligently towards him. And he did his best to tell them what it was like to see. But they never believed him. 15 generations of blind people, they never believed him. They thought he was crazy. And the man fell in love, though, with a girl there, and the girl's father, Jacob, went to talk to a doctor about him, and this was the conversation. The doctor said, "I think I may say with reasonable certainty that in order to cure this man completely, all that we need to do is simply a simple surgical operation to remove these irritant bodies, which we call eyes. And then he will be sane," they asked. "Oh, then he'll be perfectly sane and a quite admirable citizen." "Thanks heavens for science," said old Jacob. Wells goes on to point out that the man would not be allowed to marry Jacob's daughter unless he submitted to this operation that would blind him. So what would the man do? Wells writes, "He had fully meant to go to kind of a lonely place where the meadows were beautiful with white narcissus, and he was going to remain there until the hour of his surgery should come. But as he was walking there in those beautiful fields, he lifted up his eyes and he saw the morning like an angel in golden armor marching down the steeps. And it seemed to him that before all of this beauty, he and this blind world in the valley, his love down there and all, were no more than a pit of sin. And the man who could see escaped the country of the blind with his life and with his sight." That is where we live. We live in the country of the blind, that is proud of its science, its technology, its advancement, sure of itself, and yet oblivious to the true light of God. It's not only pitiful, it's deadly. Jesus actually said, "Men love darkness rather than light." Jesus had his own name for the country of the blind, and he called it technically the world, and the apostles call it that as well, the cosmos. In his last words to his disciples before going to the cross, Jesus warned them of the hostility they would face, just as he had faced it in this blind world. Yet rather than pulling his beloved followers out of this blind and hostile world, Jesus sends his Spirit into his people to convince this world of its blindness. Now, I tend to be a bit of an optimist. I see they've kind of got the poinsettia prison here today. Not sure I can move around. All right, so we live in this, I'm sort of an optimistic when it comes to evangelism and reaching people through reason and logic, because that's kind of why I'm a believer. I believe it because I believe it intellectually. Now, it's in my heart, but it's my brain that led me to faith, not the other way around. And some people are different, but I've never believed you have to swallow your brain to be a Christian. And so when it comes to Christian evidences and apologetics or defending our faith, I've always had a lot of optimism that we can sort of prove the faith and then people will come to it. And so I'm always excited when Christian archaeologists discover things in the ancient world that lend credibility to the faith. Like, did you know that we have actually found the ossuary or the bone box of Jesus' brother? Did you know that? We have found an ancient bone box that comes from the ancient world that literally says, "James, the brother of Jesus," on it. When I learn those things, when I see those things, I get so excited because it just shows greater and greater credibility for the historic nature and validity of our faith. So I love arguments that lead to theism, that lead to the idea that there must be a God. And then when we get people to the point where they believe there must be a God, then we can sort of single down through the world religions that Christianity and Jesus and his miraculous life are defensible. And that must be the true God. I love all of that. And I believe it really does help people get to faith. Now, the other side of that debate says that we're hopelessly lost. People are hopelessly lost. They live in the country of the blind. And some people would say that nobody has ever come to faith because of a debate, because of an argument. They would say that only the Spirit of God can break through our spiritual blindness, and it doesn't do that much good to give this great defense of our faith because that's not really where people are coming from. And I think pitting these two perspectives against each other is in fact a false choice. It is a both-and situation. There is a spiritual aspect to faith. People are spiritually blind, and the Spirit of God must awaken them as He awakened us and create spiritual interest. And only the Spirit of God can do that as He enlivens the image of God in us. But there's also an intellectual, a reason aspect to faith because God doesn't bypass the brain. We live in the country of the blind. There needs to be a spiritual awakening in people's hearts, and we want answers to hard questions on the way to faith in Jesus. People who are skeptical deserve answers to hard questions. They deserve to know that there's historic credibility to our faith. And so when they want to know, can I trust the Bible? That's a very legitimate question. It's not just about Jesus. Long before Jesus, they need to know, can I trust this book that talks about Jesus? Can I trust the Bible? Is there only one way to heaven? Is the resurrection credible? Do science and the Bible conflict? Both of these arguments are true. We live in the country of the blind and we need the Spirit of God to awaken us, but also people need answers to hard questions. Now you're going to see this modeled very clearly in the passage that we're going to read today. Luke, who writes this passage, was a physician. He was a doctor. He's a science major. And he wanted to get it right. And he knew that people would have very credible questions about the historic validity of what he wrote. So he set about to give a man named Theophilus, a great boy's name, Theophilus, its recipient, a 2-volume set. So Luke wrote, this doctor wrote 2 volumes. He wrote Luke and he wrote Acts. It was a 2-volume set about Jesus and about the expansion of the early church. And I want you to turn with me to that. It's on page 43 of the New Testament. So get to the right side of your Bible, and the pages begin again in the New Testament and go to page 43. And we're going to just read that together. Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 25. Page 43. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, the recipient of the letter, so that you may know. I love this verse. Why is he getting this right? Why is he studying the history? So that you may know the exact truth about the things you have been taught. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zacharias of the division of Abijah. He had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both advanced in years. Now it happened that while he was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division, according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And the whole multitude of the people were in prayer outside at the hour of the incense offering, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him standing at the right of the altar of incense. Zechariah was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear gripped him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your petition has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will give him the name John. You'll have great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and he will drink no wine or liquor, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while yet in his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he, it's your son, who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, before the Messiah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Well, Zechariah said to the angel, how will I know this for certain? For I'm an old man and my wife is advanced in years. In other words, we can't have kids anymore. The angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel. Didn't really appreciate being questioned, you know? I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God. I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day when these things take place. Take that, that's in the Greek. Because you did not believe my words, which were fulfilled in their proper time. The people were waiting for Zechariah and were wondering at his delay in the temple. But when he came out, he was unable to speak to them, and they realized that he'd seen a vision in the temple, and he kept making signs to them and remained mute. When the days of his priestly service were ended, he went back home. And after these days, Elizabeth, his wife, became pregnant, and she kept herself in seclusion for 5 months, saying, this is the way the Lord has dealt with me in the days when he looked with favor upon me to take away my disgrace among men. Now, I love Luke's perspective. He's a doctor. I think like Luke. People need to know the facts. People want the exact order of events. He says, I want you, Theophilus, who I'm writing this letter to, along with the book of Acts, I want you to have confidence in what you're hearing here. So I've done the research. He said, it's just like medical school. I've done the research. We've applied real historical analysis because at the end of the day, I want you to be sure. That's what he says in verse 4, so that you may know the exact truth about the things you've been taught. And the first one is this: an ancient prophecy or marker in history was fulfilled in this story in the coming of John the Baptist. Now, prophecy is a fascinating subject. A promise or prediction is made that comes true in the future because God is controlling the course of history. There's a real miraculous nature to it. And we have this prophecy fulfilled in Luke 1:17. But Luke is also referencing where it comes from in Malachi. If we could get that next slide, please. He says, behold, Malachi 4, 5, and 6. These are the last words of the Old Testament. Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He's going to restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, the hearts of the children to the fathers. So those are the last words in the Old Testament. Luke 1:17 said, it's your son that's going to go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. This is the fulfillment of that verse, he says. Malachi 4, 5, and 6 are the last verses in the Old Testament. Now, after that, there have been what we call the 400 silent years. No word from God. No prophet since about 400 BC. No word from God. No real miraculous events in the nature of Israel's history. Now, we're expecting when we get to the New Testament that the first thing to be fulfilled is Jesus coming. It's not. The first thing to be fulfilled is this prophet coming before Jesus. Based on those verses in Malachi, the next event in salvation history is not a virginal conception of Jesus. It's not a miraculous figure named Jesus. It's not a Messiah or king. Rather, it is a different historical figure that precedes the Messiah. In other words, if Jesus comes, lives a sinless life, performs all kinds of miracles, and this person doesn't come before him, Jesus isn't the Messiah. This prophecy is coupled with the prophecy about Jesus. It has to be fulfilled. Every gospel writer concludes that John the Baptist is that individual that fulfills these Old Testament promises of a prophet like Elijah who's going to come. You know, we don't talk about this story because we're excited about Jesus. But you can't get to Jesus till you get to John. It is absolutely historically necessary. And all the gospel writers say, this was the guy. Second, and this is a beautiful story, another Christmas miracle accompanied the virginal conception. I love this story. Now, in Israel, being a priest was not a calling. It wasn't like being a pastor. In Israel, being a priest was more like the family business. It was like a family destiny. You had to be born in it. So in the Western world, if somebody feels like, I want to be a pastor, I feel called to that, I want to spend my life doing that, you sort of make that choice. In the Old Testament and in the days of Jesus, you couldn't do that. In order to be a priest, you had to be what? A son of Aaron. So you had to be from the lineage of Aaron that goes way back in Old Testament history. So all sons of Aaron were basically by family destiny a part of the priesthood. So Zechariah is one of the sons of Aaron, by many generations later. He's a priest who lives in the hill country of Judea, near Jerusalem, the capital. He lives there with his wife Elizabeth. And Luke actually begins by defending their honor a little bit. He wants you to make sure that you understand that Zechariah was a righteous man, and he also married Elizabeth, who was the daughter in a priestly family as well. That sort of gave them better credentials too. Not only was he a priest by birth, he married a daughter of a priest. And he wants to help you understand that, because in that culture, if you couldn't have children, you were judged pretty harshly. Now, it's really sort of sick and twisted, but in that culture, there was a lot of belief that if you have some sort of illness or malady, that you must have done something naughty, and God's punishing you. In fact, not being able to have kids, which was typically blamed on the woman, unfairly, was actually, in rabbinic literature, a legitimate cause for divorce. That's how harsh this was in that culture. So Luke begins by basically saying, hey, this is a great couple. She's the daughter of a priest. They're both righteous. They're wonderful people, but they were childless. And I would say, based on the textual evidence, until menopause. Zechariah is scheduled as a priest in Jerusalem. Now, there are about 20,000 sons of Aaron. That's a lot of clergy, wouldn't you agree? 20,000 pastors for one big building. All right. So they divided up the priests into 24 divisions of just under 1,000. And all of these priests would come during the three major festivals, the feast, the Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. All the priests were on duty that week, and then 2 other weeks of the year. And so you served basically 5 weeks, and then you'd go to the temple, and some of these special duties, like burning of incense or sacrifice, those sort of duties actually were chosen by lot. Probably not drawing straws, but maybe numbering off, because you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of priests there. Each day there were 2 burnt offerings, a meal offering, and a burning of incense. And the burning of incense was a great privilege. It represented the prayers of the people going up to God. In fact, it was such a great privilege that they wanted a lot of the priests to be able to participate in it. So if you were chosen to burn incense, you could only do it once in your lifetime as a priest, to make room for other priests to be able to do it. Zechariah had never had this honor. But that morning, he probably went to the great hall of hollowed hewed stone where these lots would take place. They were drawn, and he goes into the inner chambers of the temple as he is drawn by lot to burn incense. He's in the inner chambers of the temple by the burnt sacrifice. There's hundreds and thousands of people outside praying. They're waiting for the priest to appear. And then Zechariah has a visitor. Gabriel, an angel. Now, I just want to give you a little background. It's not good to be in the Holy of Holies and get a visitor from God. Because in that place by the burnt sacrifice, in fact, on the Day of Atonement, do you know what they did to the priest? They tied a rope to his leg, and they put a bell on his robe. Do you know why? Because they were concerned if God struck him dead, we need to be able to drag him out of there. All right? I have no rope on my ankle. It's been suggested by some of the elders, but no rope on my ankle and no bell on me, where God would strike me dead. You can see me. But in the Holy of Holies or the holy place, they couldn't. So they literally would outfit a priest with that on the Day of Atonement, just in case God was really ticked and struck him dead. So Zechariah sees Gabriel. He's scared to death. And here's what Gabriel says. He says, God has heard you, and he's heard Israel. Not just about your pain of fertility. He's going to give you a son, and that son is actually going to be an answer to prayer for your whole nation. You're going to be a daddy, and your boy is going to be the forerunner, the messenger before the Messiah that will pave the way for truth and blessing. He's going to get this nation ready for God. Zechariah is stunned. And rather than thinking, this is great, and thanking God and Gabriel for this incredible news, he brings up the natural question. last I checked, we're not probably going to have kids. We gave up on that dream a long time ago. And I need a sign. How am I going to know this for certain? For I'm an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And there's kind of a technical age that goes along with that back then. My wife is advanced in years. This sounds a lot like Mary's comment just later on in the same chapter. How can this be since I'm a virgin? He's saying, how can this be? I'm an old man, my wife is advanced in years. A few verses later, how can this be since I'm a virgin? Gabriel is having a tough month. I mean, he basically gets back to heaven. He's like, I need some holiday. I need some workman's comp. I don't want any more field trips to these people. They don't believe anything I say, and I'm there with wings and everything. Nobody believes me. That's inversion. Anyway. Gabriel did not appreciate the question, so he says to Zechariah, I'm Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. And you're questioning me? You're not going to be able to speak till this is fulfilled. So what has happened here? And why do I call this a second Christmas miracle? Because the language Zechariah uses, I'm an old man, my wife is advanced in years, is typically used of people of at least 60 years of age in that culture. So I'm not saying this is, as firm as Jesus is the Son of God. What I am saying is this. I believe they had given up having kids. I believe the angel is referencing prayers from long ago in their lives. And I believe Elizabeth is postmenopausal. And I believe Zechariah has a legitimate question, how on earth is this going to happen? And Gabriel gets a little touchy. You want a sign? I'm going to give you a sign. The worst thing for a guy, you're not going to be able to talk. So Zechariah comes out of the temple, unable to speak. He's unable to deliver the blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord's face shine upon you and give you peace. That would be a traditional blessing. He's unable to do it. And all the people can see something has happened, and he's trying to communicate. He starts doing charades, one word, 2 syllables. Sounds like, angle. He's just angel, with wings. He's out there he's trying to communicate what's going on. And the people know something miraculous has happened, but they don't know what. When his week was up, he made the walk home to the hill country of Judea. Without cell phones, internet, Elizabeth doesn't know what's happened. And so she starts speaking to a silent husband. And she's just trying to figure out what's happened. Now, there's parts of the Bible God just doesn't give us. But boy, am I curious about the interplay between those two at this point. All right? If I'm Zechariah, I might want to play a trick on her. I'm not telling her she's going to get pregnant and just wait till a couple months from now when she can't figure out why she's, not feeling good. I don't know what he did. I don't know if he tells the whole story. I don't know if he just offered her a warm bath and a back rub and hopefully things would follow. I don't know what happened. That's funny. That's funny. In America, that would be funny. All right, thank you. All right. I don't know what happened. But soon, Elizabeth was pregnant. I believe this postmenopausal woman in her 60s, her body has been made alive, and she is now carrying a baby after praying for decades that God would give her a child until she ceased having her regular cycle. She is now pregnant. She takes herself into seclusion. 6 months later, Gabriel visits Mary. She becomes pregnant, and this dynamic duo is in utero. The forerunner, 6 months older than his cousin, Jesus. When they met, and they're still in their mother's wombs, the scriptures say, when John the Baptist got in the presence of Jesus, he jumped in Elizabeth's womb. Just a little thing that Dr. Luke included in his research. Luke lays it out for Theophilus, probably a newer believer wanting to understand the origins of his faith. Luke includes every detail. He says, I want you to be certain. There wasn't just this virginal conception of Jesus. There was this other Christmas miracle. And another miracle kind of where God shut this guy's mouth for 9 months. That is a miracle. I think all women would agree. But anyway, and the third point. a messenger or forerunner was born. And everyone needs a messenger. So we have another verse here about this John the Baptist or this new Elijah. And it comes from Malachi 3 and 4. It says, a voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make smooth in the desert a highway. Up every mountain and hill be made low, and the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Actually, that's my mistake. That's from Isaiah 43. From Isaiah. So soon John the Baptist arrived. And this prophecy is fulfilled, a second Christmas miracle. And it's fascinating that the Son of God, think about this. Jesus is coming into the world. He's going to walk the planet for 3 decades. I find it fascinating that Jesus actually needs help. Don't you? Jesus is going to walk the planet. He's going to heal the blind. He's going to make lepers clean. I mean, he's going to do things that are not just giving people sugar pills to make them feel a little better. He's going to overturn the laws of nature. He's going to walk on water. He's going to do things in front of thousands of people that are not explainable. But even Jesus needed somebody to prepare people's hearts because we live in the country of the blind. Isaiah 40, that verse that's quoted there by Luke, speaks to an old tradition in the ancient world. When a king was coming, what would you do? You would make smooth in the desert, a highway for our God. You would lift up the valleys, take the hills down. What he's talking about is construction, road construction. You get the place ready for the king, so you smooth out the roads. You take down the hills. You fill in the gaps, the gullies where water has washed them out. You make smooth a way for the Lord. That is John the Baptist's role in the life of Jesus, is to get people's hearts ready, like doing some road construction. Ahead of a king coming, you're doing some heart construction ahead of God presenting himself to humanity. See, we live in the country of the blind. Even people in Jesus' day explained away miracles because their heart condition was flawed. I find it fascinating in the human condition that we are capable of discarding overwhelming evidence for the truth based on our biases, preconditions. And when it comes to God, we have a lot working against us. The world, the Bible talks about the world, the flesh, the devil. The world is a system opposed to God. Our old natures, our proclivity towards sin, our flesh, if you separate that from the old nature, some do, some don't. Our flesh, our body trained by the old nature. Satan, an unseen enemy, creating and empowering competition with the gospel. We are made in God's image, yet sin has broken us and we're spiritually dead. So on the one hand, we have sort of God's fingerprints on us. We're made in the image of God. It gives us divine curiosity, if you will. But we're also spiritually dead. We need a messenger like John to help us to get ready for the truth of God. But God wants people to be sure. He wants us to have the evidence. So I want to close with 2 thoughts. First, the country of the blind is real. We are not spiritually objective beings. I'll give you an example of that. An article in Discovery magazine noted a new study that suggests there are around 700 quintillion planets in the universe. 700 quintillion, but only one like Earth. It's a revelation that's both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Astrophysicist Eric Zachrisson from Uppsala University in Sweden arrived at this staggering figure, a 7 followed by 20 zeros, with the aid of a computer model. He found that Earth appears to have been dealt a fairly lucky hand. Good for us. In a galaxy like the Milky Way, for example, most of the planets Zachrisson's model generated look very different than Earth. They're larger, older, and very unlikely to support life. One of the most fundamental requirements for a planet to sustain life is to orbit in the habitable zone of a star, sort of the Goldilocks region where the temperature is right and liquid water can exist. Earth is more than your garden variety planet. Of course, the article begs the simple question. If we Earth dwellers, that is, were dealt a lucky hand, who dealt us the cards? And the article doesn't mention God or the idea of God. But it can't avoid language that implies a master card dealer. All that we experience, all that exists in this world cannot be explained without God. Yet look at how often people respond to the idea of God. In a popular interview posted on YouTube, scientist Leonard Lodinow, who co-authored The Grand Design with Stephen Hawking, declared, "Science shows that God is not necessary to explain the universe." He says, "I find it very hard to see how people could believe in the Bible." But then Lodinow gives this very surprising answer to another question in the same interview. "I tend not to believe things that there is no evidence for, but it's not always true. I do believe, for instance, in aliens." Okay? So he's looking at the universe. He says, "I can't believe in God, but I believe in aliens. I believe that there's life on other planets, and I think there's no evidence for that. We don't understand the origin of life on Earth well enough to say how probable it is that on another star life would form, but in my heart, for some reason, I find myself believing that." Look at this guy saying, we don't need God because our brains don't need God to get Earth, but out of a leap of faith, I believe in aliens. And this is a smart guy. Christian apologist William Lane Craig says, that is really bizarre, isn't it? That he believes in aliens even though he says he has no evidence for it, but he just finds he believes in his heart that extraterrestrial life exists, but he doesn't apparently find it in his heart to think that God exists the way many people do. If he thinks he's irrational in believing in aliens, why isn't it rational to believe in God? I'll tell you why. Jeremiah 17:9, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Who can even understand their own heart?" We're flawed. We live in the country of the blind. And by the way, for those of you who think, yeah, scientists don't believe in God, but the rest of us do, what does that say about us? I got an article from the American Association for the Advancement of Science that says that 36% of science have no doubts about God's existence. 18% of scientists attend weekly religious services, compared to 20% for the rest of us. The scientific community is almost just as on board as Christianity is about the idea of God. But all humans have spiritual blindness. That's why God performed miracles. That's why God emphasizes fulfilled prophecy. God is broken into history. Miracles abounded in the life of Christ and in the Old Testament. Prophecies were fulfilled. Why did he do all that? Because we're spiritually blind, and he wants you to be sure. He wants you to have some confidence that this isn't mythological. These weren't people who weren't taking seriously what they saw and what they wrote down. They were historically accurate and credible because they wanted us to be sure. And finally, we all need a messenger like John the Baptist to guide us to Jesus. Even Jesus on earth needed help with this issue. Every one of us is a part of this process. I've talked before about what I think it's called the Engel scale. That, if you take a scale of minus 20 or minus 10 to plus 10, a minus 10 would be an avowed atheist. A minus 5, would be somebody who's pretty skeptical. A minus 3 might be a person with a religious background, but they've never had a personal relationship with Christ. And when you get to 0, that's your point of faith. A plus 3 is a young Christian. A plus 5 is a very mature Christian. A plus 10 is my wife for marrying me. The saint. Billy Graham, Dee Brushaber. But our job in this world as messengers of the gospel, as John the Baptist in other people's lives, what? It's to take that neighbor, that friend, that person at work, and to get them from a minus 5 to a minus 3. And people who are outside of faith need a variety of Christians in their lives over time to help prepare the way, to prepare their hearts. Jesus needed somebody to come ahead of him. How much more so your family member, your coworker, your friend? And your job isn't necessarily, hopefully you can get them to the 0 point, to the point of faith. But being in their lives and sharing your faith and loving them and listening to them gets that person from the minus 10 to the minus 7, or the minus 7 to the minus 5, or the minus 3 all the way to the point of faith. And that's your role. And it's part of the Christmas story. Before we got Jesus, we got John the Baptist. This Christmas, who does God want you to be John the Baptist to? Who does God want you to be befriending in 2020? Who does God want you to be playing cards with, or having supper with, or hanging out with, just to help them move on that scale towards faith so that more people know and love Jesus?
Thanks for listening to this sermon. We hope you found it connected you to the God of truth and love, who we worship and serve at Bethany Chapel. If you have any questions or want to connect to any of our pastors, please go to our Bethany Chapel app and choose Connect, or go online to bethanychapel.com and click Come. Thanks again, and God bless you.